Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to say thank you for inviting me to this wonderful meeting. And I have to, and I would like to say, and I would like to apologize to create disorder in the chronology, because we're moving, as you can see here now, back in time again into the Paleolithic. What I would like to do today is to give you a brief overview of our work in Sharjah, the collaboration between the University of Tübingen and the Sharjah Archaeology Authority. In general, our research there the goals of our research there can be summarized as follows. We would like to develop a chronocultural framework for the Paleolithic period. We'd like to document the typo-technological diversity observed in the record. And we would like to examining behavioral evolution in the high-risk environments of the deserts. And we are interested in the role of deserts for expansion processes, for expansion of modern humans out of Africa, for expansions of other hominins out of Africa, or even within Arabia. Cornerstone to all our research is the Paleolithic research in Sharjah. It's the site called Jebel Faya, Fayeni 1, discovered by Hans-Peter Erdmann back in 2003. He excavated the site until 2010, and in 2012 he asked me to continue while he retired. And today I'm not the only person having worked at the site. Mark, you also spent quite a number of years at the site trying to document the Paleolithic occupation history of the site. Jebel Faya is still the only one site in the entire Arabian Peninsula with a very deep Paleolithic record, as we shall see in a second. There's no other similarly deeply stratified site in the entire Arabian Peninsula. So it's a very important site. Hans-Peter focuses research mainly, or what he published at the end, is the sequence that he excavated in front of the rock shelter on the terrace. And after we took over in 2012, we focused the already the excavations in the rock shelter were already begun at that time, but we continued here and we went all the way down, and we spent one season of removing one of these big blocks to continue to connect the sequence that we excavated within the present-day rock shelter with what Hans-Peter has excavated in front of the present-day rock shelter. This was quite an effort, but fortunately it was worth doing it, because just after we removed this one big block here, we found the archaeological layer just underneath. And these layers are also, it was possible to connect these layers stratigraphically to the sequence that was published from the terrace in front. And this gives us a correlation of our archaeological layer 4 with Hans-Peter's assemblage A, then B and C, respectively to 5 and 6. And you see here these datings, these OSL datings of these layers, and indicate that we do have a Paleolithic occupation, at least from beginning at 125,000 years ago and running into the terminal Pleistocene. What makes this sequence here in particular interesting is these two layers up here, layer 2 and 3. These are two layers that we do not have in the sequence on the terrace. They are not, we couldn't find evidence for these two layers on the terrace. So these are still unique, and we still try to figure out how old these layers are. From the typo-technology of the lithic assemblages that we found in these layers, we are about sure that these two layers are not part of the Holocene, but could probably represent a terminal Pleistocene occupation, and it has to be younger than 40,000 years. So, but this is still work in progress, and we try to figure out a way of how to dating these assemblages here. To give you a brief overview of the archaeological contents of the different layers, and what is interesting to see is maybe not so obvious, but these 4 pictures show 4 very different type of technological assemblages. What you see here are only cores, and what is important is that we do have here in AH2, we do have a bidirectional reduction from 2 sides of the core. These are relatively flat cores. There's no further preparation, only sometimes we do have some kind of platform preparation. Then the AH4, which is the 40,000 assemblage, is characterized by multi-platform cores. So reduction took place from different angles and from different directions over the core, and the core was always turned. So this is a completely different strategy compared to what we see here. And continuing into AH6, which is the equivalent of the 125,000-year-old assemblage. Here we do have flat cores and with a centripetal reduction. So it goes all the way around, and flakes were produced from the periphery into the center of this lithic raw material. Again, something very different from what we know from the upper 2 layers. And layer 7, which is below layer 6, this is all we can say at the moment. We don't know how old it is, but this is again technologically very different, because it's a combination of very different reduction strategies that we haven't seen in the other assemblages before. Some brief observations from the fire shelter sequence. What we realize is that we do have large chronological gaps. I pointed to the 125 and the 40,000 assemblage, and there's probably only one occupational period or phase in between that. And then, of course, we do not know how old these are here, but it is clear that within the last terminal Pleistocene, there are not many occupational phases represented in Jabal Fire. And what I explained just in the previous slide was that we do have a very discontinuous lithic technology. The main question now is, what controls this pattern? Of course, climate controls the pattern in a sense that occupation is not possible during dry periods, most likely. And we interpreted this already here, seeing these large gaps probably reflecting pulses of occupation, and definitely a discontinuous occupation through that time. But we are archaeologists, of course. We not only trust the climate, we ask what else could it be that drives the observed pattern. And of course, social cultural evolution can push the limits set by the climate. And what exactly do I mean? I'm talking about desert adaptation. Do we see any kind of strategies, behavioral strategies developed by the occupants of Jabal Faya through time that indicate a lifestyle that is better adapted to dry periods, to increasing desert adaptation? How can we do this? Well, surviving in the desert is mainly a problem of coping with risk, coping with unpredictability of precipitation. So the more flexible land use strategies are, the more flexible people are in terms of when and where they can get their raw material to produce the tools that they need. The better they are staffed for surviving in dry and in the desert environments. And we just began studying these kind of questions, and we started with questioning What about economization of lithic raw material? Do we see any trends throughout the sequence? We would expect if there is a better adaptation to desert environments, if there is a better coping with risk, we would expect that lithic technology would reflect this. And if we see an increase in economization, this could be indeed a hint towards a better adaptation to high-risk environments. We use for this, we 3D scanned lithic cores and lithic flakes and blades, and we use an index called usable edge length per volume, which argues that the more cutting edge you produce per unit volume, the more efficient is your reduction strategy. And it's about similar in terms of cores. The more intensively you can reduce one unit raw material, the more efficient you can be. You'll be more efficient at the end. So we did that, and we measured these. We measured the volume for flakes, and we measured the cutting edge length, and we realized that through time we see an increasing efficiency. That means in the younger layers, just like A, for example, they need less volume to create the same length of cutting edge, just in general. The same, we see also some evidence for an increasing reduction intensity through time. Here is kind of frequency distribution. The peaks show these areas where we have the most values falling in. We do have the scar density index here. The bigger the numbers are, the more increased is the reduction. The more intense is the reduction. And what we see is in the beginning, we do have the peak in AH6, we do have the peak in the very low numbers here, and this moves towards the bigger numbers, and we even have a bimodal distribution in the youngest layer, probably indicating that we have a local raw material that was not heavily reduced, and we do have some imported raw material that's probably more intensively reduced. So what we can say at the moment is we are not finished with these studies, it's just preliminary data, but we already see some diachronic shifts in raw material economy, at least some hints at that, so we would like to continue in this direction. But of course it poses questions. Are these shifts related to climatic change? Are these related to changing demography? Or is it indeed evidence for an increased desert adaptation, or is it just random at the end? So we're trying to answer these questions in the next years and intensify our studies in this direction. Next, I would like to show you this new site. It's called Jebel Buhays. It's Jebel Buhays, but it's not the famous Neolithic cemetery. Buhays 18 is Buhays 84. It's just on the other side of the Jebel. And there we have a nice little rock shelter here, and you see all these blocks in front. They all protected sediments behind. We started excavation there because we had the impression there is some sediments in front, and where you have a rock shelter and sediments, you start excavating, and there's a good chance to find something, at least for the Paleolithic. Anyway, so we started excavating last year. This is of course a view from the top. This is only 3 square meters, just 3 test pits, just to see if there's anything. And indeed, we were lucky. We found 3 archaeological horizons with quite a density of artifacts, in particular in the upper one. And we haven't reached bedrock yet. We just stopped. This is in this hole here. We just stopped here. And we are optimistic that it goes a little bit deeper. So at least we do have these 2 very good archaeological layers and 1 thin scatter probably in between. We do not know yet. This is what we want to do, to continue there, open a larger trench and see what's going on there. So far we just have found stone tools, no beads, no metal, nothing. And again, the stone tools do not look like typical Holocene material. So we may again talk about terminal Pleistocene. They also do not look terribly old, so I would tentatively put them into the terminal late Pleistocene somehow. There are some affinities with the AH2 from Jebel Faya. So here's some examples. It's also, again, the two assemblages are very different. This is 1 and 2. So in the one, we do have a blady component or elongated flakes. In the other one, we do have rather, normal flake production. But this is very preliminary. I really have to open more areas to see how it's going on. A third interesting area is in Sharjah is Zuhaila. This time we don't have anything to excavate here. It's lying on top. We have lots of surface scatters of lithic material, and in particular interesting here are at that time 2 hand axes that we found there that we think represent an Acheulean occupation of the area. We found another, now we have in total 5 more or less finished hand axes and a number of preforms, and also we collected the site systematically. These hand axes came from this area here. We collected everything and described the entire assemblage there. For those of you who are interested in it, I published this recently in Quaternary International. And the interesting fact here is these Acheulean hand axes extend the Sharjah occupation history into the Middle Pleistocene. I think there are maybe we're talking about age, I don't know how old it is, but we're talking about age ranges probably 500 to 200,000 before present, probably rather closer to the younger end. And it is the easternmost site in Arabia with Acheulean hand axes. And this provides evidence for a pan-Arabian distribution of the Acheulean. In this area in Zuhaila, the department, the department fenced the whole area, so it's protected. And last October we went there and then did systematic surveys. So we walked these transects, at least 20 of them, A to T. And we identified 37 lithic scatters along these transects. And what's interesting is that there's a diversity that I've never seen before in the region, and I'm absolutely convinced that we do have here assemblage types that are not represented in the Jebel Faya sequence. So I would argue the Jebel Faya sequence is not representing the entire history of the terminal Pleistocene occupation. There is more going on there. I can't date these sites because these are all surface, and given the lack of chronocultural stratigraphy for the whole region, for the Paleolithic, it's difficult to say something chronologically about these finds. But I think documenting the diversity is a first step in a better understanding of the Paleolithic period of the region. Of course, none of these results would be possible without interdisciplinary collaborations. We do have colleagues working on the paleoenvironment, which I think is always important. If you do a survey in particular, always take a geomorphologist with you. It helps very much. And we do have, of course, geoarchaeology doing micromorphology from the sites. Of course, chronology is a big topic. And we just started this year and testing sediment DNA. I don't know if it's working, but we had a chance to give it a try, and so we will see. I hope one day I can talk about this in more detail. To conclude, yes, the UAE have a deep Paleolithic record. There's no question on this. It may reach back until 200,000 years ago, if not earlier. We do have nice rock shelter sites with deep Paleolithic sequences in the region that provide high quality data for developing chronocultural frameworks, which is still a topic that we have to work on. And as I just mentioned a minute before, I think surface finds, even if we can't date those, if we do have a small number of stratified sites, I think these surface sites can provide important additional data to better understand the entire, or to better understand the occupation history. And I would also say understanding human occupation of deserts provides insight into the evolution of human-environment relationship, a topic archaeologists are traditionally always interested in. And and I think deserts are in particular interesting regions. So, and just some future goals, I think most importantly, continued research for datable stratified sites. This is what we need at the end. We still need, for the Paleolithic, we still need to build up this chronocultural stratigraphy. I also would say consider also other site types. Do not only try to find rock shelters and caves. There are not so many of them in Arabia, or if they are there, they are often empty. But there are other types, situations where you can find stratified material. To better understand the Paleolithic occupation history in terms of still few stratified sites, a systematic documentation of the typotechnological diversity in surface sites and their spatial distribution can provide first insights. And as I said already, always take someone who's working on paleo-environment with you if you do archaeological field investigations. And of course, I would like to say thank you to all these people here and institutions for funding our work there and supporting us massively. Thank you very much.